Today is the 12th of September 2017. I'm a little hungover from September 11th. This is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. I'm Paul Glumaz. I'm an activist in the political movement of Lyndon LaRouche. Okay. So today I'm going to focus on the fact that Lyndon LaRouche, last Friday, on September 8th, turned 95 years old. He's still around. He's, not as spry as he used to be, but he's still around. He's still talking to us. We're still having discussions with him, and he is having an impact. Now, 95 years ago, in 1922, the birth of Lyndon LaRouche, we were all excited about the great, roaring 20s, and then we had the crash, and then we had the Depression, and then we had Roosevelt rebuild the country, and then we had World War II, and then we had the Cold War, and then we had the Vietnam War in the middle of the Cold War. We had the Korean War in the middle of the Cold War, and then the Vietnam War in the middle of the Cold War. And then we had 9/11, and then we had a war on the axis of evil. Saddam Hussein, Libya, Syria, and now we got North Korea. Everything, nothing makes any sense. Why didn't we do what Franklin Delano Roosevelt intended after the war, which is to completely rebuild the world, use the industrial power of the United States to completely rebuild the world? Why didn't Wallace become vice president and then president instead of a very meager person in the name of Harry Truman? Why have we, since Harry Truman's ascendancy, been in a continuous war? Why did he drop the bombs on Japan? Why do we live for decades in the terror of a nuclear war? Now we're in the terror of terror, right? The terror of all of the substances we produce. We're terrorized by the threat of carbon dioxide. Pretty soon we're going to be terrorized by the threat of oxygen. Why are we all living in this kind of fear and dread? You're going to get cancer from eating oranges, and whatever. That's the world we're living in, okay? But the rest of the world isn't really living that way. And we go back to Lyndon LaRouche in the early 50s, when he was roughly 30 years old. He made a profound breakthrough in economics. He discovered that man's relationship to the universe is through scientific discoveries and the application of those scientific discoveries through the social process to improve the productivity of labor and improve the relative potential population density that is possible for human society. In other words, human beings recreate the universe as they develop to provide for them the means to sustain populations at higher living standards and higher cultures. That's who human beings are. Most of us don't know that. Most of us don't have an inkling that that's the case. But that's who we really are. We are not animals. We are not dogs. We are not cats. We're not monkeys. Although some people would like to be like their cat or their dog, we're not that. We are human beings, and as human beings, we have this incredible capability without which we cannot survive. And if we don't develop it, we don't use it, then we will not survive, because we will not be able to sustain our existence, because our existence depends on a relatively few people that emerge from our society who are geniuses and who make discoveries, and those discoveries get assimilated, and we go forward. But that is not what we are being told we are, and that is not what the ruling oligarchy of the planet wants. But they don't have any say in it, because the policies that LaRouche began to promote on an international level in the late 70s, and the policies like the Oasis Plan for the Middle East, or later in the 80s, the Trans-Aqua Plan to move the water from the Congo up to develop Africa into the north to create a super Tennessee Valley Authority for Africa that would essentially give them the means to produce food at an exponential amount of food relative to what they have now, and also stop the desertification that has been going on since the 70s. Or later, in the late 80s, early 90s, the proposal for the New Silk Road, or the Eurasian Land Bridge, as a way of connecting the industrial power at that time of Europe with the industrial potential development of Asia. That was presented to the Europeans first, and then when it was destroyed, when it was not allowed to be presented, and Europe did not move to develop Eastern Europe but to loot Eastern Europe, then this proposal was presented to the Chinese in the early 90s, because as something that ultimately the Chinese are going to have to do if they're going to develop. And the conferences were held 20 years ago, and finally 4 years ago the plan was implemented, and this is the LaRouche Plan. And this LaRouche Plan, whether it's the Trans-Aqua Program or the Oasis Plan for the Middle East, or the plan which China's now adopted in the One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative, is based on LaRouche's economics of increasing the relative potential population density through the development of infrastructure, the development of culture, and the education and development of scientific breakthroughs. This is the future. The future that you're going into has been shaped by the efforts of Lyndon LaRouche. Whether you ever know this or whether you ever discover this, it has been shaped by the efforts of Lyndon LaRouche, based on a scientific concept of man's relationship to the universe, and based on his breakthrough in physical economics. And it's that breakthrough in physical economics that is currently beginning to inform broader circles of nations, with China, Russia being key, but other nations as well. And it's now up to us and LaRouche's 4 laws to apply these here in the United States. And what is happening right now in the United States is the collapse of the infrastructure is going on, whether by hurricane or whether not by hurricane. The collapse of the infrastructure of the United States is unavoidable. And under the existing financial system, there is no possible way to carry out the necessary infrastructure development. Not even the capability to repair the collapsing infrastructure, let alone embark upon a broad, centralized overview of rebuilding the infrastructure at a higher level. That there's just no way under the existing system. But those who sustain themselves within the existing system, those whose identities are tied into the existence, those whose inordinate, inappropriate monetary wealth is tied to this existing system, are determined not to allow that to happen, nor the power that has been running this world. But it's too late. They can't stop it. And the reality is now emerging in the United States, especially in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, and especially in the wake of Hurricane Irma. Irma destroyed Florida. It's not just Houston. It's Florida. The infrastructure damage, the damage to Florida, is way in excess of Harvey, and Harvey was way more than Sandy in New York, which was more than Katrina, or a little on the par with Katrina. So now this is causing a crisis. The the fiscal conservative lieutenant governor of Texas is now calling for building all these things, as if he'd been calling for it all along. He's a Tea Party guy, and the two senators from Texas are now mobilizing to try to get the money for the projects that should have been built, like a seawall and a reservoir that should have been built a long time ago. But the point is, they're not going to get any money because they have to create, the credit has to be created for it, and the question is, how is this credit going to be created? We even have prominent hedge fund managers calling for the Federal Reserve to use their excess funds or their reserve to use it as an infrastructure fund, getting Congress to give them the authority to turn part of the Federal Reserve into an actual credit mechanism for infrastructure development. This is the first time we've heard this. Obviously, people are beginning to be concerned, and they're beginning to make proposals, whether they're right or wrong, or whether they have any value. This is a significant departure from where we've been in the past. So there is this process going on. You also see LaRouche's ideas of how you conduct politics on an international level being reflected in the way the Chinese and the Russians are conducting policy. You have this North Korean situation. This North Korean situation was on the way to resolution because back in '94, Bill Clinton, in proxy dialogue with LaRouche, adopted LaRouche's policy of peace through development with Korea. That is, we'll build a nuclear power plant for you. We'll help you develop with South Korea, and then we can begin to end this problem. That was wrecked by the Bush administration and Obama for the simple reason they wanted a pretext. They wanted the nuclear program to be embarked upon by North Korea. They wanted North Korea to build the missiles because they wanted to have an excuse to set up the eastern part of the surrounding of China and Russia with the capabilities of a preemptive first strike winning strategy. That has been the policy of the United States, to begin to build up, under whatever pretext, a war-winning first strike policy, nuclear strike first strike policy against Russia and China. That has been U.S. policy. Prompt global response. That has been the U.S. policy, to have that capability and to use it as a threat to force Russia and China force Russia to break with China and ultimately Russia and China to submit. This has been U.S. policy, and most of our military right now is committed to that policy, despite Donald Trump being the president. Okay, they want to be able to have the capability of winning a nuclear war, but they don't want to necessarily have a losing nuclear war. They want to be sure that they have that capability before they do it, of course. But this is the insanity of the situation in North Korea. So North Korea cannot be resolved because the North Koreans have seen what we did to Libya and Syria and Iraq, and they understand that, and they will not. But what is Putin doing, and what are the Chinese doing? Well, what they're doing is very important. What they're doing, and what Putin did at the Far East Economic Forum, which ended in earlier this week in Vladivostok, is he's laying the network of economic projects to bring Japan in, to bring South Korea in, to bring China into the development of the Far East. He's even got a bridge proposal from the Sakhalin Island to Hokkaido to link the Siberian area by rail and the rest of Eurasia by rail to Japan. And this is part of his idea of creating the economic conditions for bringing North Korea into those economic conditions and bypassing the whole war situation. So that's peace through development. That's Lyndon LaRouche. And that was the same kind of policy that LaRouche was proposing for the Middle East, but it never got off the ground. Clinton actually tried to do it. in the 90s, but it didn't come off because of the assassination of the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who, and this was not wanted by our deep state, and it wasn't wanted by the British. So they wrecked the agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and also the economic protocols that were part of the peace agreement. So we now come to the situation in Syria. And the reality is that the entire neocon program of using Al-Qaeda and using all these guys as proxy warriors, ISIS was created by the United States. Al-Baghdadi was a U.S. intelligence informant agent. This is all known. And this was, and also to use the Sunni, to promote the Sunni Wahhabi attacks on the Shiites to create this situation. But the secular army of Syria, which is mostly Sunni, has defeated with the help of the Russians ISIS, and this has changed the nature of the situation. This has caused a collapse of the Sunni plan to have permanent war. Using religious war between Sunni. This is what's playing out in Yemen. It's the same game. And Yemen is now facing annihilation, starvation, and everything with the help of the blockade and with the help of U.S. weapons, which are massacring the civilian population. And all these neoliberal human rights people, not a squeak, as millions of people are dying in Yemen. That's your liberals for you. The human rights people that want to wave all the red bloody shirts, most of which have been fabricated by videos. This is them. Not a peak squeak about Yemen. And U.S. involvement in providing U.S., British, and other nations' involvements in providing the weapons for the Saudis to carry out this horrific genocide that is now going on. Speaking of the Saudis, the man from Saudi Arabia who went to work for Prince Bandar in the 9/11 thing was Louis Freeh. As soon as he passed the torch over to Mueller, he went to work for Bandar. And Mueller was the guy who suppressed all the evidence of the 9/11 and the Saudis. And he's the one that is now being exposed in the media for obstruction of justice, for obstructing Congress's investigation. So the principal obstructor of justice, support for the Saudis, and imposing FBI control and preventing the truth about 9/11 to come out is the man now leading the charge to remove Donald Trump. So this is the guy, Mueller. His successor was Comey, who was on the board of directors of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, the #1 drug money laundering bank in the world, as our intelligence services, as our Justice Department, our justice system has laid it out. Nothing happened to them, slap on the wrist. And people say, well, did Comey know that the bank he was the director of was involved in the drug trade? No, I say he didn't. Not only did he know, but that's because that's how he got to become FBI director. Because FBI directors today, their principal job is to protect the drug trade, to protect Wall Street, which is to some degree based on the drug trade. So if you're not protecting the drug trade, you're not qualified to be head of the FBI these days. So that's what you're dealing with. Okay, you're dealing with this kind of system, this kind of very evil system. So nonetheless, the hurricanes have caused a change in the United States. A very powerful change is beginning to occur. And what is happening right now is that Donald Trump did not wait around. He moved very rapidly to throw in all the resources that were available, whether they be private, public, federal, state, local, into dealing with the devastation. And he's doing the same for Irma as he did for Harvey. And this show of effort on the part of Donald Trump has created a situation where even the Democrats have had to work with him on this. And this is very important because this is the first time the Democrats have worked with Donald Trump. And as this occurs, then the possibility of future collaboration between Democrats and Donald Trump, which is very necessary because the Republican um, delegations to Congress, except those waking up now, like those in Texas, who are Republicans, and might cross over to the reality that the magic in the marketplace and physical austerity does not work, and we need a new system. That's also possible, but it's very important because this then opens the door for a bipartisan development of and bringing in LaRouche's policies. You cannot bring LaRouche's policies in if Donald Trump is completely dependent on just a bunch of Republican budget cutters, or end times evangelists, or even libertarians who don't believe in credit, just gold. You know, they're nice people, but you know, you don't want to run your country based on what they're proposing. You're going to have a, collapse of society. So that, you can't really base your policy on that. So this is important. What's going on? The hurricanes have incredible damage of the hurricanes. It's a wake-up call on the most profound level. So this is where we are 95 years after the birth of Lyndon LaRouche. LaRouche's policies are there. They are prepared. They are ready to be implemented in the United States. And we are seeing significant motion in that direction. Donald Trump also had a meeting with the delegations from in Congress from New Jersey and New York to deal with on the Gateway project, where they have to build these 2 tunnels across the Hudson to be able to then fix the other 2 tunnels. Number one. Number two, they have to replace this bridge. That's 5 years overdue. And they've managed to keep it going. This is a freight bridge over the Hackensack, near Hackensack, New Jersey, across where a large part of the freight that goes north-south between Florida and New England goes through. A large part of the freight. And that thing goes, you have a lot of immovable freight. You basically cut off New England and everything north of the Hudson from everything south of the Hudson in terms of the volume. So these are the things that have to be dealt with, and you cannot avoid them, and you don't have the means to do so unless you develop a credit policy and unless you deal with the too big to fail, too big to jail financial system. Okay. So now we have again the trifecta of conferences going on internationally, and you have to understand what this means. The first was the BRICS conference, which was held in Xi'an, a city that once Xi Jinping was the leader of. And it's a city of about 4 million people in the western part of China, where the old Silk Road began. And in this city, they had the BRICS meeting. And what's emerging is a process of these countries, the 4 BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with all their problems, and now they're being joined by other nations, are actually developing a dynamic of development. And they are moving away from the dollar-denominated international system to a system that they work between themselves. They are now representing an increasing large portion of the development of the world. Right now, China's infrastructure activity on a global scale is 31% of the world's infrastructure activity. 31% is Chinese building infrastructure. Now, so there is this process going on, and then you had the Far East Economic Forum in Vladivostok, and what this is pulling together the people to build and develop the raw material extraction of all of the eastern Russia, the vast areas of eastern Russia, with all the minerals, the timber, and etc. This is huge. Oil, gas, all of that is destined to be participating in the development of Asia and the development of the world. So this is very important. And then now you have the ASEAN meetings going on, Southeast Asian nations meetings. I think it's in the Philippines, I'm not sure, but it is huge. And this is where the Southeast Asian nations meet with all of the other nations, and you're having all kinds of developments going there. And this is all outside of the transatlantic system. This is all outside of the power that runs this world, has been running this world. And a new system is coming in, and it has been coming in for some time now. And this is the system that the United States has to orient towards. This is the system that the United States has to work with. And so, and that goes for Europe, and that goes for the United States. And already there's a hue and cry in Europe about the Chinese investments in developing the rail and infrastructure in Serbia, and seeking to connect that Serbian infrastructure to Greece, to the port there, Piraeus, and then extending that infrastructure into Europe. And this is what the British tried to stop when Germany was building a railway from Baghdad to Berlin, from Berlin to Baghdad. This is that whole Balkans area is so mountainous and so difficult. It's a barrier between nations, and by building the rail and other infrastructure to connect it all, you connect up. Then now you have a way of going into Europe. So this is, and the New York Times is calling it a Chinese invasion of Europe. It's like an invasion. In the meantime, everybody's freaking out over the military exercises that they're claiming are going to be big in Belarus, between Russia and Belarus doing these exercises. As if somehow what we're doing around the world with terrorism in Yemen and mass murder that we're doing around the world is somehow, not so alarming as the Russians doing military exercises to prepare for defense in the event that the U.S. launches a war against Russia, or NATO launches a war against Russia. So they're all going berserk, claiming that the Russians are going to invade, the Russians are coming, and I think there was a movie made about that, the Russians are coming. And that's kind of the state of the hysteria that you have among the Baltic countries and the NATO countries, and it's all hysteria being driven. Okay, now you also have another situation in Myanmar, but I'll go through that next time.